There is a particular kind of person you have probably met at least once in your life. Maybe you are thinking of someone right now. They are the ones who remember the small things, the offhand comment you made 3 weeks ago about being stressed, the way your voice changes when you're pretending to be fine. They notice when you are quieter than usual. They ask how you are and actually wait for the answer. They absorb the weight of other people's pain the way dry earth absorbs rain, completely and without complaint. Most people look at this person and see softness. They see patience. They see someone who will always come back, always understand, always find a reason to forgive. And so, because human nature is what it is, some people start to take that as an invitation. They push a little, then a little more. They cancel plans and offer thin excuses. They say things with an edge and then call it a joke. They take and take and take, and the compassionate person absorbs it all, and life continues, and nothing seems to break. So they keep going. What they do not realize, what almost nobody realizes until it is far too late, is that they are not dealing with someone who has no limits. They are dealing with someone whose limit is simply invisible. And invisible does not mean absent. It means you will never see it coming. Because here is the truth that most people spend years learning the hard way. Compassionate people are not endlessly forgiving because they are weak. They are endlessly forgiving because they are strong enough to carry the weight of other people's worst behavior while still choosing to see the good in them. That is not naivety. That is a conscious daily decision, and like every decision made by a conscious person, it can be unmade. The moment it is unmade, something happens that most people are completely unprepared for. The compassionate person does not explode. They do not send a long emotional message at 2 a.m. They do not call your friends and tell your secrets. They do not make a scene. They simply, and this is the word that people always struggle to accept, disappear. Not physically, not immediately, but in every way that actually matters. The warmth is gone, the attentiveness is gone. That particular quality of attention they used to give you, the kind that made you feel genuinely seen and understood, that is gone. And you will feel it before you can explain it. You will reach out and the response will come polite, brief, correct. And you will feel for the first time what it is like to be on the outside of something you used to be inside of. This is not a punishment they are consciously delivering. This is simply what happens when a compassionate person reaches the end of what they are willing to carry. And understanding why this happens, truly understanding it, not just on the surface, requires understanding something fundamental about how compassionate people are built differently from the inside. They do not experience the world the way most people do, where an average person moves through a conversation tracking the words being said. A deeply compassionate person is tracking at least 3 things simultaneously. They hear the words, they register the tone beneath the words, and they feel the emotional current underneath the tone, the thing the speaker is not saying but is radiating outward like heat. This is not a skill they developed. It is something closer to a built-in operating system. They cannot turn it off any more than you can choose to stop understanding language once you have learned it. Which means every interaction carries more information for them than it does for most people. A sigh at the wrong moment lands differently. A compliment that does not quite reach the eyes registers as data. The split-second pause before someone answers a direct question. They notice it, file it, and carry it forward. They are not doing this to judge you. They are doing it because it is simply how their nervous system processes being alive. And here is where things get complicated, because the same sensitivity that make them extraordinary listeners, loyal friends, and deeply present partners also makes them exquisitely accurate at detecting when something is wrong, when they are being lied to, when they are being managed, when the version of themselves that someone is presenting warmth and care to is not actually them, it is just the version of them that is useful. They feel the gap between what is being said and what is true. They feel it early. Often they feel it before they have the language to describe what they are feeling. And in that gap, in that space between sensing something is wrong and being able to prove it, is where their greatest vulnerability lives. Because they do not want to be right. That is the thing people never understand about compassionate people. When they sense that someone they care about is being dishonest, their first instinct is not anger. It is not confrontation. It is hope. They hope they are misreading the situation. They go looking for the alternative explanation, the charitable interpretation, the reason this could all still be okay. They give you the benefit of the doubt, not once, not twice, but so many times that by the time the evidence becomes undeniable, they have been quietly carrying the knowledge of your behavior for weeks, sometimes months, sometimes years. All that time, you thought you were getting away with something. All that time, rewatching, hoping, waiting, and building without meaning to. A completely accurate picture of exactly who you are when you think no one is paying close enough attention. There is a pattern that plays out so consistently, it is almost predictable once you know what to look for. Someone enters the life of a compassionate person. The compassionate person opens up genuinely, fully, in the way that only people with real emotional depth are capable of opening up. They invest, they show up, they give the kind of attention and care that most people spend their entire lives searching for and never quite finding. And for a while, everything feels right, but somewhere along the way, the other person starts to slip. Maybe it begins small, a broken promise here, a dismissive comment there. Maybe they start taking the compassionate person's consistency for granted, treating their reliability as a guarantee rather than a gift. Maybe they begin testing, consciously or not, how much they can get away with before something pushes back. And when nothing pushes back, when the compassionate person absorbs it, forgives it, finds a way to explain it away, the testing goes a little further. This is the cycle. And what makes it so dangerous is that on the surface, it looks like things are fine. The compassionate person is still there, still kind, still engaged. They have not gone cold, have not started arguments, have not issued ultimatums. So the assumption becomes, we are okay. What is actually happening is something entirely different. Inside the compassionate P, something is accumulating. Every moment of dishonesty, every time their gut told them something was wrong and they chose to override it, every instance where they extended grace that was not earned, all of it is being stored. Not deliberately, not with any plan or intention. It is simply the way their emotional memory works. They feel things deeply, which means they remember things deeply. A careless comment from 6 months ago is as fresh as if it happened this morning. A pattern of small betrayals adds up with compound interest. They are not keeping score in the vindictive sense. They are keeping score in the survival sense, tracking whether they want to or not, whether this person is safe. And all the while, they are fighting against their own data. This is the part that breaks them slowly, the internal war between what they feel and what they want to believe. They want to believe in the person they first met or the person they know this individual could be. They are wired to see potential in people. It is part of the same emotional architecture that makes them so empathic. They can feel not just who you are, but who you might become. And that vision of who you might become keeps them holding on long past the point where someone with a less compassionate nature would have already walked away. So they stay, they try harder, they have careful conversations that go nowhere. They adjust themselves, wondering if perhaps they're being too sensitive, too demanding, too much. They absorb your version of events, even when their entire nervous system is telling them your version does not match reality. This is the cruelest part of what happens to compassionate people in relationships with people who do not deserve them. They turn their extraordinary capacity for empathy inward and use it against themselves. They become so skilled at understanding your perspective that they temporarily lose grip on their own. This is not weakness. It is what happens when someone who is built to connect tries desperately to maintain a connection that has already been quietly broken by the other person's choices. But something always happens. There is always a moment, sometimes dramatic, more often mundane, where the weight of evidence simply becomes too heavy to reframe, where the gap between who they hoped you were and who you have repeatedly shown yourself to be collapses completely. And in that moment, something shifts inside them. It does not announce itself. There is no declaration, no confrontation, no final argument where they lay everything out and demand accountability. There is just a quiet internal rearrangement. A door closes, and what makes this shift so final, so absolute, so bewildering to everyone on the outside is that it does not come from a place of anger. Anger is hot. Anger wants a response. Anger is still invested in you enough to want you to feel something. What closes in a compassionate person when they finally reach their limit is not anger. It is clarity. Cold, clean, unshakable clarity. The kind that does not need to be argued or explained or defended because it is not an opinion anymore. It is a conclusion drawn from an overwhelming body of evidence that they have been collecting against their own wishes for longer than anyone around them knows. And once that clarity arrives, it does not leave. This is what people who have hurt compassionate people consistently fail to understand. They think that because the compassionate person was patient for so long, the patience is the person. They think they can wait out the silence, that eventually the warmth will return, that an apology or a gesture or enough time will reset things to the way they were. It will not, because the compassionate person is not withholding warmth as a strategy. They are not playing a game, not waiting to feel sufficiently apologized to, not hoping you will come crawling back so they can feel powerful. The warmth is not being withheld. It is genuinely gone, redirected with extraordinary efficiency toward the people and things that did not require them to betray their own instincts in order to maintain the relationship. The person Ho remains is not the same person you knew, not because they changed in a dramatic or performative way, but because the part of them that was open to you specifically, that particular door, is no longer there. And you can stand in front of where it used to be for as long as you want. You will find nothing but wall. People always describe it the same way. They say it felt like the temperature dropped without warning. Like walking into a room where you are welcome but not wanted. Like having a conversation with someone who is present in every technical sense, responding, nodding, occasionally even smiling, but who is simply no longer there in the way that used to matter. This is what the disappearance of a compassionate person actually looks like from the outside. And it is far more disorienting than most people expect, because it does not look like what people imagine when they picture someone finally having enough. There is no slamming door, no tearful confrontation where everything is laid on the table, no block on social media, no returned gifts, no mutual friends taking sides. In fact, from a distance, nothing looks different at all. They still respond to your messages. They still show up to the things they said they would show up to. They are still, by every observable metric, present in your life. But something is missing, and you feel it before you can name it. What is missing is their attention, not the surface level attention of someone who looks at you and responds to what you say. That is still there. What is gone is the deep attention, the kind that made you feel when you were on the receiving end of it, like you were the most important thing in the room. The kind that remembered the details, that caught the subtext, that met you in the spaces between your words. That quality of presence, the thing that probably drew you to this person in the first place, has been quietly, completely withdrawn. And because you were likely never fully aware of how much you were relying on it, its absence hits in a way that is difficult to articulate. You find yourself talking more to fill the silence that was never there before. You find yourself wondering if you said something wrong, if something happened, if they are going through something. You reach a little further in conversations throw out more personal information than usual, trying unconsciously to provoke that old feeling of being truly received by another person. It does not come. What comes instead are responses that are perfectly adequate and somehow completely hollow. Correct answers with no music in them. Politeness that functions as a wall. And the more you reach, the more clearly you begin to sense, though you may resist the understanding for quite some time, that you are no long. Jer reaching toward a person who is moving to meet you, you are reaching into a space that has already been vacated. Here is what most people do at this point, and it is almost always a mistake. They escalate. They interpret the distance as a problem to be solved through more contact, more explanation, more effort. They send longer messages. They push for conversations. They bring up the relationship itself, asking what is wrong, what happened, what they can do. And the compassionate person responds because they are even now compassionate. But they respond in a way that gives you nothing to push against, no anger to address, no grievance to fix, no specific complaint to resolve. Just a quiet, impenetrable okayness that somehow makes everything worse. This is not a tactic. It is not the silent treatment dressed up in polite language. It is what genuine emotional closure looks like from the inside. The compassionate person is not holding something back from you. They have genuinely processed the grief of this relationship, quietly, privately, over a long period of time that you were probably not even aware was happening, and come out the other side. By the time you feel the distance, they have already done the mourning. They cried if they needed to. They sat with the disappointment and the confusion and the pain of realizing that someone they cared for deeply was not the person they had hoped they were. They felt all of it, probably more intensely than most people feel anything, because that is how they are built. And then they let it go. Not the memory. Compassionate people rarely fully lose the memory of people who matter to them, but the investment, the hope, the open door, those they let go completely and permanently in the quiet way that only people who have done serious internal work are capable of letting go of things. What remains is not resentment. It is not even sadness anymore, not exactly. It is something closer to neutrality. And for the person on the outside, neutrality from someone who used to be so warm can feel like the coldest thing in the world. Because you know, somewhere beneath your confusion, what that neutrality means. It means you have been reclassified. Not as an enemy. Compassionate people rarely hold enemies, but as someone who is no longer part of the inner world, someone who exists on the periphery now, someone whose presence or absence registers with approximately the same emotional weight as a stranger on the street. And no one who has ever been loved or deeply known by a compassionate person is prepared for what it feels like to be reduced to that. The cruelest irony is that this is often the moment people realize what they actually had. When the warmth is gone, when that specific quality of being truly seen and understood is no longer available to them, they suddenly understand its value in a way they never managed to while they had it. They start remembering, really remembering, what it felt like to be on the inside of this person's world. The conversations that went somewhere real, the sense of being known without having to explain yourself, the feeling of mattering to someone who noticed everything, and they understand, perhaps for the first time with complete clarity, that what they had was not ordinary. That not everyone gives that way, that finding someone capable of that quality of presence is rare, and they had it, and they treated it carelessly, and now it is gone. This understanding almost always arrives too late. Not because compassionate people are unforgiving. They are, in fact, extraordinarily capable of forgiveness. But because their forgiveness and their trust are two completely separate things, and most people spend their lives confusing the two. A compassionate person can forgive you fully, genuinely, without any residue of bitterness, and still never trust you again. They can wish you well with complete sincerity and still never let you back in. Forgiveness for them is something they do for themselves. a way of releasing the weight of what happened so it does not become part of who they are. It has nothing to do with you. It is not a signal that the heart is open again. It is not an invitation. It is simply them choosing not to carry your worst behavior as a burden into the rest of their life. The door being closed and the resentment being released are not contradictions. They are both expressions of the same thing, a person who has decided with great care and without drama that their peace matters more than your access to them. There is a question that sits underneath everything we have talked about, and it is the question that actually matters, not why compassionate people disappear. You understand that now. The real question is this: what kind of person do you want to be in the presence of someone who loves that deeply? Because here's the thing about compassionate people that nobody tells you. They are not looking for perfection. They are not keeping a scorecard waiting for you to slip up so they can justify leaving. They do not need you to be flawless or endlessly interesting or emotionally evolved beyond your years. What they need, the single thing that keeps that door open wider than you will ever fully appreciate, is honesty. Not the performance of honesty. Not honesty when it is convenient or when you have already been caught. Real honesty. The kind that shows up before you are forced into it. The kind that says, I did something wrong, I know it, and I am telling you because you deserve the truth more than I deserve your comfort. That is it. That is the entire requirement. And yet it is the thing that the people who lose compassionate people almost universally fail to provide. Instead, they manage. They spin. They offer half-truths dressed up as full ones. They take the compassionate person's capacity for understanding and use it as a loophole, knowing that if they frame things carefully enough, the compassionate person will find a way to make it okay. And it works for a while. It always works for a while, until it doesn't. Until the gap between who they are being told this person is and who this person actually is becomes too wide to bridge with even the most generous interpretation. And then the door closes, quietly, finally, without ceremony. Now, if you are watching this and you are the compassionate person in this story, if you recognize yourself somewhere in these words, if you felt the particular exhaustion of being someone who feels everything and forgives everything and still somehow ends up carrying more than your share, then I want to say something directly to you. What you carry is not a flaw. The depth at which you feel things, the way you stay when others would have left, the extraordinary effort you put into seeing the best in people even when they are showing you their worst, none of that is weakness. It never was. But here's what I also need you to hear. Your compassion was never meant to be a resource for people who do not know how to treat resources with care. It was never meant to be a bottomless account that certain people could draw from indefinitely without ever making a deposit. The moment you decide to stop absorbing what is not yours to carry, the moment you close that door and redirect your energy toward yourself and toward the people who genuinely deserve it, that is not you becoming harder, that is you becoming whole. The people who matter will understand that distinction without needing it explained. The people who do not understand it were never really there for you to begin with. They were there for what you gave them, which is a different thing entirely, and a difference worth knowing. And if you are watching this from the other side of that door, if you are the person who is standing in front of a wall where there used to be a warmth you took for granted, then this part is for you too, not to make you feel guilty. Guilt without change is just noise, but to offer you something more useful than guilt, which is understanding. The compassionate person who has gone quiet on you did not leave because they stopped caring. They left because caring about you was costing them something they could no longer afford to pay. Their own sense of reality, their own trust in their own perceptions, their own peace. They did not disappear to punish you, they disappeared to survive. And the fact that their survival required distance from you is information worth sitting with, seriously and honestly, in a way that most people resist because it is deeply uncomfortable. Here is the uncomfortable thing. If you lost someone like this, it is worth asking not just what they did wrong or what went wrong in the relationship, but what you did with the trust of someone who trusted deeply, what you did with the attention of someone who paid more attention than almost anyone else in your life ever has, what you did with the patience of someone who gave you more time and more grace and more benefit of the doubt than you probably deserved, and what you chose to do during all that time and grace and benefit of the doubt that was extended to you. These are not easy questions. They are not supposed to be. But they are the questions that, if you answer them honestly, not to anyone else, just to yourself, in the quiet, might be the thing that changes how you move through the world from here. Because compassionate people are not infinite in supply. The person you lost was rare. Not rare in the sentimental greeting card sense, but rare in the genuinely statistical sense. Someone built with a capacity for depth and presence and loyalty that most people encounter only a handful of times in a lifetime, if they are lucky. And the ones who know how to recognize that rarity while they still have access to it, the ones who respond to deep care with honesty instead of with management, with reciprocity instead of with convenience, those people get to keep it. They get to live inside that warmth for as long as both people choose each other. Everyone else gets to learn what it feels like when the light goes out. That is not cruelty. That is simply the natural consequence of what you did with something irreplaceable. Compassionate people do not disappear to hurt you. They disappear because staying would have hurt them. And somewhere along the way, they made the quiet, difficult, absolutely correct decision that their pain matters too. Not more than yours, not less than yours, equally. And that decision, small, internal, made without announcement in a moment you probably did not even notice, was the most powerful thing they ever did. Nobody warned you about the quiet ones, the ones who never slammed doors, the ones who never raised their voices in the middle of an argument, the ones who sit across from someone who is hurting them and still find a way to ask if that person is okay. Nobody warned you about what happens when those people finally reach the end of something. Because when they do, it doesn't look like what you expect. It doesn't look like a breakdown. It doesn't look like tears or shouting or a dramatic exit. It looks like a Tuesday. It looks like a normal conversation where one person gives a slightly shorter answer than usual. It looks like a text that takes a little longer to arrive. It looks like someone who used to light up when you walked in the room, now simply looking up and then looking back down. That's it. That's the whole thing. And somehow that quietness is the loudest thing that has ever happened in the room. This is the story of what happens the day the empath snaps. But before we go there, we need to go back, because you cannot understand the snap without understanding the silence that came before it. You cannot understand the withdrawal without understanding everything the empath absorbed before they finally stopped absorbing. Most people think empaths are sensitive because they feel too much. That's not the whole truth. Empaths feel precisely. They feel the shift in your energy when you walk in carrying something you haven't said yet. They feel the small difference between the way you laugh when something is genuinely funny and the way you laugh when you're performing happiness for the room. They feel the exact moment a conversation stops being a conversation and starts being a negotiation. And because they feel all of this with that kind of precision, they spend an enormous amount of energy doing something most people never notice, managing the emotional temperature of every room they walk into. They turn down their own needs so the atmosphere stays comfortable. They translate their hurt into something softer and more palatable before they hand it to you, because they have already predicted your reaction and they don't want to cause a scene. They tell themselves they are being understanding. They tell themselves they are being patient. And for a long time, they believe it. But there is a difference between patience and self-erasure. And the empath who is so gifted at reading everyone else, is often the last person to read that distinction in themselves. Here is what no one talks about. The empath doesn't just feel your emotions, they carry them. There's a difference. Feeling means the emotion passes through you. Carrying means you take it with you. It sits in your chest at 2 a.m. It colors the way you see yourself. It slowly becomes indistinguishable from your own inner world. So when the empath has been in a relationship, romantic, friendship, family, it doesn't matter where they are consistently required to absorb someone else's mood, someone else's unprocessed anger, someone else's emotional instability, they don't just get tired. They get full. There is no more room. The box is at capacity. And the cruelest part of this is that the empath often doesn't realize how full they are until something incredibly small tips it over. A tone of voice, a dismissive gesture, a moment where they tried to say that hurt me, and the response was not curiosity, not care, not even a real apology, just redirection, just defense, just another moment of being made to feel like their pain was an inconvenience they were inflicting on someone else. And in that moment, something shifts. Not loudly, not violently, the way a bone doesn't snap under a single blow, but under the accumulated pressure of years, and then all at once. The empath doesn't get angry, not in the way you might expect. Something colder and more final happens. The hoping stops. And when the hoping stops, something else rises in its place. Clarity, the kind of clarity that doesn't feel like relief. It feels like standing in a very quiet room after years of noise and realizing the noise was never coming from outside. It was coming from the story you kept telling yourself that if you loved enough, explained enough, tried enough, stayed soft enough, something would finally change. The snap is the moment that story ends. What makes this so difficult for the people around the empath is that they were not watching the buildup. They saw the person who always showed up. They saw the one who always forgave. They saw the one who had an endless capacity for giving people another chance and another and one more after that. They built an entire model of who this person was based on that behavior. And so when the empathist snaps, when the warmth cools and the effort stops and the door that was always open suddenly requires a knock, it reads as a personality change. It reads as cruelty. It reads as abandonment. People say you've changed, as if change is a betrayal, not a survival strategy. They say you used to be so open without asking what it cost to stay that open for that long. They say I don't understand what happened, when what they mean is I preferred the version of you that was easier for me. But here is the truth that this video is going to sit with for the next few minutes. The empath didn't change. The empath had arrived. What you are seeing when the empath goes quiet, goes still, stops performing warmth they no longer feel, that is not coldness. That is the first honest thing they have shown you in a very long time. The version that was always available, always forgiving, always finding a way to make your comfort their responsibility. That was the performance. This is the person. And the person has finally decided they are worth protecting. Let's talk about what the buildup actually looks like, because this is the part that gets skipped over, and it's the most important part to understand, not just for the empath listening to this, but for anyone who has ever loved one and wondered how things got so far without them noticing. The buildup doesn't announce itself. It doesn't arrive with a warning label. It looks from the outside like everything is fine. It looks like the empath is handling it. It looks like they're okay. And the reason it looks that way is because the empath is working extremely hard to make it look that way. That is the whole tragedy of it. The very skill that makes them extraordinary, their ability to hold space, to regulate emotion, to keep the peace, becomes the thing that hides the damage until the damage is done. Here is how the buildup works in practice. Early in the relationship, the empath notices something, a pattern. Maybe it's the way you shut down when they try to bring up something difficult. Maybe it's the way a conversation about their needs somehow always ends up being about your feelings. Maybe it's the way that when they say, I'm struggling, the response is sympathetic for about 30 seconds before the subject changes. They notice it, they file it somewhere, and then because this is what empaths do, they give you the benefit of the doubt. They construct a generous explanation. You're stressed. You had a hard childhood. You don't mean it the way it sounds. You're doing your best. They believe these things not because they are naive, but because they are genuinely capable of holding complexity. They can see your wound and love you through it at the same time. That capacity is real, and it is beautiful, and it is also the thing that keeps them in rooms they should have left much earlier. And they adjust. They learn which topics are safe and which ones will trigger a reaction they'll spend days recovering from. They learn to soften their language, to approach difficult conversations at the right time of day, to read your body language before deciding whether tonight is a night they can be honest. They become fluent in a language of careful navigation, and they speak it so naturally that after a while they forget it isn't their native tongue. They forget that they used to say what they meant without doing 12 calculations first. They forget what it felt like to have a feeling and simply express it without bracing for the impact. And alongside all of this quiet adaptation, something else is happening. The empath is accumulating. Every time they swallowed something that hurt, it didn't disappear. Every time they decided this wasn't the right moment to bring something up, that moment got stored somewhere in the body. Every apology they gave that they didn't actually owe. Every time they talked themselves out of their own perception because you seemed so convinced they were wrong. Every night they lay awake replaying a conversation and wondering whether they were too much, too sensitive, too needy, when really they were just a person who wanted to be met halfway and kept being told the halfway point was a personal attack. All of it, every single instance, filed and stored and carried. And here is what people don't understand about that accumulation. It is not dramatic. It does not feel day to day like something catastrophic is building. It feels like being a little tired. It feels like needing a little more time alone than usual. It feels like going through the motions of a conversation without being fully present in it. It feels to the empath like they are simply managing, like this is just what relationships cost. Like everyone probably feels this way, and the ones who don't are just better at handling it because the empath spent so long prioritizing your emotional reality over their own that they have genuinely lost track of what their baseline is supposed to feel like. They don't know what it feels like to not be tired. They have forgotten what it is to enter a conversation without armor. Now here's the moment. Not the snap, we'll get there. The moment just before it. There comes a point where the empath tries one more time, not dramatically, not as an ultimatum. They try the way they always try, quietly, carefully. With the door held open for you, they say something honest. They let one real thing out. Maybe they say they have been feeling invisible. Maybe they say they need more than what they've been getting. Maybe they just let you see for one unguarded second that they are not okay, and they watch your face, and they wait. And what they need in that moment is not perfection. They don't need a grand gesture or a tearful revelation. They need one thing. They need to see that you are curious about them, that what they just said matters to you, that you are someone who can be moved by their reality. And if in that moment what they get instead is defensiveness, if what they get is a pivot to your feelings, or a minimization of theirs, or a version of you're too sensitive wrapped in slightly more sophisticated language, something registers, not as a feeling exactly, more like a fact, a quiet, devastating fact that the mind files without ceremony. This is not going to change, not because you are irredeemable, not because the relationship is worthless, but because each change requires someone to first acknowledge that something needs changing. And if you cannot see it, if you have looked directly at their pain and found a way to make it about your own comfort, then the empath understands something they cannot ununderstand. They have been hoping for a version of you that does not exist. And hope, once it dies, that particular kind of death does not come back the same way. This is the breath before the snap. This is the last moment of the before. Everything after this is different. Now we are inside the snap itself. And I want to be precise here, because precision is what this moment deserves. The snap is not a decision the empath makes consciously. It is not something they plan. They do not wake up one morning and choose to become unreachable. What happens is quieter than that and more final. Something in the body simply stops volunteering. The hand that used to reach out automatically, the one that would smooth things over before they had a chance to become something bigger, that hand stays still. Not because the empath has become cold, not because they have stopped caring, but because the nervous system, which has been running an emergency response protocol for months or years, has finally done what nervous systems do when they are pushed past their limit. It has rerouted. It has stopped sending resources to the place that keeps getting depleted and started sending them somewhere new, somewhere internal, somewhere that belongs only to the empath from the outside. This looks like a personality transplant. The person who used to text back immediately now takes hours. The person who used to initiate the plans, the check-ins, the repairs after an argument has stopped initiating. The warmth that used to fill every interaction has been replaced by something neutral, polite, even, functional, but stripped of the particularity that made being around them feel like standing in sunlight. And the people in their life feel it immediately, even if they cannot name it. Something is different, something is gone. The instinct for most people is to try to get it back by doing the same things that always worked before. Guilt, pressure, performing hurt, asking why they're being so cold, demanding the old version return as if the old version was ever the whole picture and not just the part that was easiest to receive. What those people do not realize is that the strategies that worked before worked because the empath was still hoping. Guilt worked because the empath cared desperately about being good, about being fair, about making sure no one suffered on their account. Pressure worked because the empath was still running the calculation. Maybe I am being too harsh. Maybe I should give this one more chance. The performance of hurt worked because the empath's empathy was still fully operational, still picking up every signal, still willing to set aside their own pain to address yours. But those levers only function when hope is present. When hope is gone, the levers are disconnected. You can pull them as hard as you like. Nothing moves. This is the thing that frightens people most about the snapped empath. Not the distance itself, but the realization that their usual tools do not work, that the dynamic has changed in a way they do not know how to reverse. And so they escalate. They push harder. They get louder, more insistent, more dramatic. And with each escalation, the empath retreats a little further, not out of cruelty, but out of confirmation. Because each push is data. Each demand for warmth without any accompanying offer of safety is evidence that supports the conclusion the empath has already reached. You are more interested in your own comfort than in understanding what happened to mine. But here is what I need the empath to hear right now, because this part matters just as much. The snap is not the destination. It is a doorway, and doorways can lead somewhere good or somewhere that simply looks like a different version of the same pain, because there are two things that can live inside the empath withdrawal, and they feel similar from the inside, but they are not the same thing. The first is a boundary. A boundary is clean. It has a shape you can describe. It says, I am no longer available for this specific dynamic, and here is what I need before I can open the door again. A boundary protects your peace while leaving your heart intact. It is firm, but it is not punishing. It knows what it is protecting and why. The second thing is a shutdown. A shutdown is not clean. A shutdown is what happens when the empath doesn't just close the door on the dynamic, but locks themselves inside and loses the key. It looks like detachment, but it feels like numbness. It looks like peace, but it is actually a kind of grief wearing very still clothing. The difference between the two comes down to what lives underneath the quiet. If you go still and underneath the stillness, there is a sense of something returning to you, some part of yourself you had been giving away. That is a boundary doing its work. That is your system recalibrating. That is healthy, even when it is hard. But if you go still and underneath the stillness, there is a hollow place, an ache that doesn't quite resolve, a sense that you have not protected yourself so much as disappeared yourself. That is shutdown. And shutdown is not the answer you are looking for. You are not trying to disappear. You are trying to be found by yourself first. Then, if it is safe, by the right people. This distinction is worth sitting with because the empath who does not know the difference can spend years believing they have healed when they have actually just built a very sophisticated wall and called it a boundary. The wall keeps the pain out, yes, but it also keeps everything else out, the softness, the joy, the particular electricity of genuine connection. You cannot selectively numb, you cannot close yourself off from the relationships that hurt you without also closing yourself off from the ones that could hold you. And the empath deserves to be held, not managed, not handled, not accommodated. Held, that is what they were always offering everyone else. That is what they forgot they were allowed to want for themselves. The snap is not the end of the story. It is the moment the real story begins. So where do you go from here? That is the only question that matters now. Not how did we get here? Not who was wrong. Not what could have been different. If different choices had been made at different moments along the way. Those questions have their place and their places later. Right now, the only question worth asking is the one that faces forward. Where do you go from here? And the answer is not a destination. It is a practice, a daily, imperfect, ongoing practice of choosing yourself in the small moments before the big ones demand it of you. If you are the empath, here is what I want you to understand first. What happened to you was not a character flaw. The capacity that made you absorb so much, give so much, bend so many times in the direction of other people's comfort. That capacity came from somewhere real. It came from a nervous system that learned, probably very early, that love was something you earned by being useful. That connection was something you maintained by being easy. That your needs were negotiable, but other people's needs were not. You learned that lesson in a context where it may have genuinely kept you safe, but you carried it forward into every room. I walked into after that, applying it to people and situations that no longer required that kind of self-erasure to survive. And so the work now is not to become someone without empathy. The world does not need less of your particular kind of feeling. The work is to become someone who applies that same quality of attention, that same precision, that same generosity, that same willingness to sit with complexity to yourself, to become as curious about your own inner world as you have always been about everyone else's. That starts with something deceptively simple. It starts with noticing the moment before the yes. There is always a moment, a fraction of a second between the request and the response where your body already knows the answer, where something in your chest tightens or drops or quietly contracts. Most empaths have learned to skip over that moment so fast it becomes invisible. The yes is already forming before the contraction has finished registering. The practice is to slow that fraction of a second down, to let the contraction speak before the accommodation answers. Not every contraction means no. Not every hesitation is a boundary being crossed, but some of them are, and you have spent long enough not knowing the difference. You are allowed to take up space in your own life. You are allowed to have needs that are not justified, explained, or softened before you hand them to someone. You are allowed to say, this is what I need, without first building a legal case for why your need is reasonable. You are allowed to be loved in a way that does not cost you yourself. That is not a high standard. That is the minimum. And if it feels like a high standard, that is information about every room you've been in that normalized something that should never have been normalized. Now, if you are someone watching this because you recognize yourself in the other role, Beck, as you are looking at someone in your life who has gone quiet, gone still, stopped reaching, I want to speak to you directly, and I want to do it without cruelty, because cruelty is not what this moment calls for. What this moment calls for is honesty. The empath in your life did not snap because they are dramatic. They did not withdraw because they want power over you. They withdrew because staying was costing them something they could not afford to keep paying. And the most important thing you can understand right now is that the thing you are feeling, the discomfort of their distance, the anxiety of their changed energy, the urgency to get back the version of them that felt warm and available, that feeling is useful information, but only if you let it point in the right direction. It is very easy to let that feeling point outward, to make their withdrawal the problem, to focus on what they are doing and how it is affecting you. That is the familiar move. That is the move that got you here. The harder move, and the only one that actually opens the door, is to let that feeling point inward, to ask not what are they doing, but what did I miss? Not why are they being like this, but what did it cost them to stay as long as they did? Not how do I get them back, but what kind of person do I need to become for them to feel safe again? And then critically, not performing the answer to that question, but living it consistently over time, without requiring them to reward you for the effort before the effort has proven itself real. Because the snapped empath is not unforgiving. They are not made of stone. They did not lose their capacity for connection the day they stopped performing it. What they lost was their tolerance for connection that costs more than it gives. And that is not a loss. That is a refinement. They are still capable of extraordinary love. They are still capable of the kind of presence that makes people feel genuinely seen. But that presence is no longer free, not because they have become transactional, but because they have finally understood something that took too long to learn. That love is not proven by how much you are willing to endure. Love is not a debt you pay with your own erasure. Love is not the thing that survives because one person refused to stop holding it together. Love that is real does not require one person to disappear inside it. The day the empath snaps is not a tragedy. It is, if you can see it clearly, an invitation for the empath to come home to themselves, an invitation for the people around them to finally show up in a way that is equal to what they were always receiving, and an invitation for everyone in that room to stop confusing endurance with love and start learning what love actually looks like when both people are fully present, fully honest, and fully unwilling to disappear. That is where the real story begins. This time, the empath is in it too.